All right, I think we are just about ready to begin. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Rhode Island Association of Realtors April Real Talk Forum on Subtle Diversity. My name is John Dolan, and I am the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee here at RIAR. Thank you for joining us today for what promises to be an enlightening and impactful session. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll explore fair housing issues related to different protected classes, including topics affecting the LGBTQIA+ community, victims of domestic violence, neurodivergent populations, and individuals with disabilities. We have a lot to cover, and you can expect to gain valuable insights into the challenges faced by these groups, as well as best practices for serving them effectively in our real estate businesses. Throughout today's presentations, we invite you to use the Zoom Q&A features to ask questions, and if time permits, we'll address as many of your questions as we can at the end of the session. Now let me introduce our distinguished panel. We have Christina DeFonseca, Executive Director of South Coast Fair Housing. Christina leads efforts to promote equal housing opportunities for all and will share her expertise on fair housing policies and practices. She founded South Coast Fair Housing in 2012 and has overseen its expansions into Rhode Island and Cape Cod. Christina has served on boards and committees of nonprofit housing, racial justice and civil rights, women's empowerment, and LGBTQIA+ organizations, and will discuss legal issues surrounding fair housing and offer best practices for creating inclusive environments in real estate. We also have John Wesley, Director of Policy and Advocacy, and Megan White, Policy and Data Specialist, both from the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. John and Megan will discuss the intersection of domestic violence and housing, addressing discrimination survivors may face, and the impact of trauma when seeking housing options and services. They will also share insights on referrals and support available for survivors. Joining us is also Beth Pinkham, Associate Director for the Ocean State Center for Independent Living. Beth will share valuable insights on how OSIL can assist real estate professionals working with buyers with disabilities. She will provide quick tips for interacting with individuals with disabilities and discuss reasons why homeownership may not typically be seen as a feasible option for them. Additionally, she will introduce OSIL's Disability Awareness Program and Home Access Program. Last but certainly not least, we also have Pauline Bennett, Regional President of Coldwell Banker Realty for the Northeast. Pauline brings years of experience and a commitment to diversity and inclusion in real estate. She will share strategies for fostering an inclusive real estate practice and supporting agents in serving diverse communities. Her insights will provide valuable guidance on achieving equity and excellence in the industry. So without further ado, let's dive in. I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Christina DeFonseca, Executive Director of South Coast Fair Housing. She will share insights into important work that South Coast Fair Housing and delve into various pressing issues affecting fair housing. These include challenges faced by the LGBTQIA+ community, the impact of appraisal bias, and the significance of legal source of income protections. She'll also touch on testing practices and what someone can do if they witness housing discrimination. We look forward to hearing what Christina's perspective is on these issues and how they affect these individuals. Please join me in welcoming Christina DeFonseca.
Hi, thank you, everyone. You should be seeing my screen right now, and we will walk through some of those issues. We are South Coast Fair Housing is a nonprofit fair housing organization. We have a mission of eliminating discrimination and increasing equal housing opportunities for all. And our program areas we kind of define them in three categories. One is our education and outreach work, where we, will do presentations like this or provide other, presentations to various groups. We will also participate in various community outreach events with the goal of reaching folks and helping to increase awareness of the fair housing laws. We also engage in fair housing enforcement work. That includes fair housing testing, which is like secret shopping, but for housing discrimination. We have testers that work for us, who we will send out on assignment to contact a landlord, a real estate agent, or whomever. And if we're, let's say, looking for or investigating possible race discrimination, we may send out a few Black testers, a few white testers, who will all contact the same entity or individual, and inquire about a housing opportunity. And those testers will then report their experience back to us. And based on those reports, we kind of evaluate whether there's sufficient evidence of discrimination to pursue some kind of legal action. There are 3 attorneys on staff right now, including myself. And we also work with individuals who have experienced discrimination. So, we'll investigate the issues that they contact us about and provide them with their options, and offer legal representation if we think that's appropriate. The third program area that we work on is our policy advocacy area, where we're looking to remove barriers, at the housing development level, or at the local government level, or at the state government level, that may be in place that reduce equal housing choice. So just a very quick reminder, because April is I'm terrible with on the spot year math, but it is the 54th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. And it was the last major federal civil rights law to be passed. And it prohibits discrimination on the basis of a range of protected classes. We will be, I think, touching on some of them in more detail today. And then we also have the Rhode Island Fair Housing Practices Act, which adds additional protected classes in Rhode Island. So I'm going to talk about a few of those protected classes, and then other folks will talk about some others. So I wanted to sort of, when we're talking about LGBTQIA fair housing rights, I wanted to put a little context on it, and provide some data. So in 2018, the Housing Discrimination Testing Program at Suffolk University performed a testing study to look at discrimination against individuals who are transgender or gender nonconforming. And that entity, they found 61% of the tests revealed some form of discrimination against their transgender or gender nonconforming testers. Among those, 27% of those testers were less likely to be shown additional areas of an apartment complex. 21% were less likely to be offered a financial incentive to rent, and 9% were more likely to be quoted a higher rental price. And in 2013, HUD engaged in a study of housing discrimination against, the title was An Estimate of Housing Discrimination Against Same-Sex Couples. And they found that 19% of transgender people had been denied a home or apartment, and 11% had been evicted because of their gender identity. And that they also found that transgender people were half as likely to be homeowners than to the general population. And in 2019, the National Assembly of Gay and Lesbian Real Estate Professionals conducted a survey of its members to try to identify what its membership thought were the barriers to home ownership for same-sex couples. And the responses indicated that about 58% of the respondents believed that fears of discrimination during the process had an impact on homeownership rates among same-sex couples. 22% believe that discrimination led to fears of rejections, and 20% reported fears of obstacles in being approved for a mortgage. And I think I think one of the things to keep in mind, right, is that if someone has already experienced housing discrimination in their past, right, or is aware of has already experienced it, and I think those individuals are going to be more likely to be fearful of putting themselves in the same situation again, right? So, one of the things to keep in mind is that with populations who are more likely to have experienced housing discrimination, and this I think carries beyond just the LGBTQIA category, but with others that we'll talk about today, um, you may find that that one incident of housing discrimination will also by creating this fear of repeated incidents of discrimination, right, it can kind of make someone more cautious about re-entering the housing market, right? So whether it's moving to another apartment or whether it's buying a home. And so I think some of the things that um, housing providers or real estate agents can do is to really think through how you can make your space especially welcoming to these populations, whether your physical space, but also in terms of how you're interacting with people and how you're marketing your work. And so I put together a few recommendations for some things to think about, in your day-to-day work, whether it's at your office or whether it's in your own individual work. Um, you may want to make sure that everyone on your team has, been has received clear communication about the office-wide policies on non-discrimination. And also think about how you communicate your office's non-discrimination policies to your clients or to the general public, right? So how are you communicating your non-discrimination policies? If you're working with landlords, how are you communicating your non-discrimination policies to those landlords, or to potential buyers or renters, or sellers? And how are you presenting your business publicly in terms of non-discrimination, but also in terms of openness and creating a welcoming space for all populations? You may want to establish an internal complaint or feedback process so that you can have a sense of, how are people's experiences with you or with your team, um, and what are some areas that you may need to work on. You may want to include gender pronouns in your business cards, your email signatures, or other public facing information. Um, and and when you're engaging with people, right, you want to be mindful of mirroring their names and gender pronouns as much as possible, right? Obviously, sometimes people make mistakes or forget, but I think acknowledging that right away and making those changes in the way that you interact. I think so. For example, right, often I will when I'm presenting myself on Zoom, I'll have my gender pronouns right up next to my name. Um, and I think some spaces, sometimes I have to keep reminding myself, right? When I introduce myself, I should be indicating my pronouns openly and upfront. Um, Particularly, when talking in a public place to a group. Um, Sometimes if I'm going to certain events, right, sometimes those events will provide pronoun buttons that folks can wear along with name tags, right, so that when someone's getting a name tag, they're also able to um, put on a pronoun button so that folks are, openly aware of everyone's pronouns, and that can sort of help facilitate better and smoother communication. Okay, and then you may want to also look at your forms. Are your forms any forms that you might use in your work? Are they inclusive? Do they provide a space for someone to indicate their pronouns? Because I think even just that little bit of being able to put that on a form and have that automatically integrated into the way that, someone is treated can indicate that the office or the individual is thinking about creating a space that's safe for individuals who are transgender or gender non-conforming. Okay, other things to think about is putting together a fair housing policy statement, which would include the basics of the law, but also add some additional information about mandatory training. And I realize I'm talking too slow, so I'm going to go very fast through the rest of it. Okay, appraisal bias. I'm sure folks have heard about appraisal bias is a new recent issue. It can occur in a few different ways, including bias on the sort of bias on the part of the appraiser, both towards the family who's living in the home, but also about the neighborhood and the demographics in the neighborhood. And then appraisal bias also comes out in the fact that appraisals are stacked on top of each other, right? So even if an appraiser themselves is not integrating any sort of bias into their report, if they're stacking their appraisal on prior appraisals and sales that were sort of infected with bias, right? That can impact sales values. So if you're seeing any appraisals that are coming back lower than you might expect, you could encourage buyers to ask the lender for reconsideration of value, or you could report concerns to our office, to the Rhode Island Commission for Human Rights, or to HUD. And HUD is part of an interagency federal task force to look at property appraisals and valuations. Also, Rhode Island in 2021 prohibited source of income discrimination, which includes protections for individuals who receive public assistance or housing vouchers, who receive child support and alimony, and who receive Social Security and supplemental security income. And owner-occupied three-family properties or fewer are exempt. But the law does say that, housing provider can't refuse to accept a housing voucher, for example, simply because of the rules of the voucher program, right? So it's sort of written in such a way that the rules of the voucher program really shouldn't be a reason to deny someone. So an inspection requirement or minimum housing standards, those shouldn't be a reason that someone with a housing voucher should lose out on a property. Okay, so we are on social media. If you want to join, follow us on various social media, and that's my contact information again for you. And I think I will end there and stop sharing my screen.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina, for your enlightening presentation and for highlighting the important aspects of fair housing on these communities. Before we move forward, I just want to acknowledge, it's come to my attention, my internet connection hasn't been great. My video was a little spotty, so I'm going to remain off video. Hopefully you all can still hear me clearly, and I apologize for the technical difficulty there. Now we're going to shift our focus to another critical area for discussion, the intersection of domestic violence and housing. And I'm pleased to introduce John Wesley, Director of Policy and Advocacy, and Megan White, Policy and Data Specialist from the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. John and Megan will share their expertise on the challenges survivors face in housing discrimination and the impact of previous trauma when seeking housing options and services. They will also discuss the role of domestic violence shelters and programs in offering referrals and support for survivors of intimate partner violence. Please join me in welcoming John and Megan.
Great. Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having us. Great to be here. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can see our slides okay there. And yeah, we'll start. First, my name is John Wesley, he, him pronouns. And I am the Policy and Advocacy Director at the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And then I'm joined by my colleague, Meg, if you want to introduce yourself too.
Hello, my name is Meg White, pronouns they, them. I am the Policy and Data Specialist at the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I want to thank everyone for coming today. Want to inform everyone some of the things that we talk about may be a little difficult to hear. So just want to prepare everyone for that. And you will hear us sometimes using the terms victim and survivor. interchangeably, and that's just out of respect for survivors because they can identify either way. So we're just respecting the language that survivors or victims choose.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Meg. Yeah, so just a bit of a background about our organization. So at the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence, we are a nonprofit organization, a statewide organization. We focus on serving and advocating for our member agency programs, which consist of domestic violence shelters and resource centers throughout the state of Rhode Island. We also work on training and raising awareness about the issue of intimate partner violence and the prevention of domestic violence in our communities. And we do some legislative and systems change advocacy as well in the public policy realm. These are some of our primary member agencies you see listed on this slide. So you see the Blackstone Valley Advocacy Center, which serves all of Northern Rhode Island and the greater Providence area. The Domestic Violence Resource Center of South County, serving all of Washington County. Elizabeth Buffum Chase Center, which serves Kent County and the Cranston Warwick area. And then WRC Women's Resource Center, which serves the greater Newport East Bay area as well. So just some of the services provided by our member agencies include 24/7 helpline, statewide victims of crime helpline, which we'll share some of these resources toward the end of the presentation. Also advocacy, case management, our trained domestic violence advocates at the DV shelters and resource centers can assist victims in crisis with safety planning and then referrals to help them get court advocacy, restraining orders, protective orders in family court and district court throughout the state, help them find emergency shelter and housing. Although that is, as we will talk about, that is very difficult at this time, the local housing crisis and regional housing crisis being what it is, that is more and more of a challenge, unfortunately. But advocates will help support victims and do safety planning and crisis triage and management with them when they are in crisis, calling the helplines or going to a shelter for support. The programs run support groups, counseling for victims and for their children who have witnessed violence at home. And then they help with systems advocacy with their local systems partners, whether it's DCYF or Child Protective Services, local police or law enforcement departments, where advocates assist victims in the criminal process, the Department of Human Services, where trained DV advocates help assist folks who need public benefits or financial resources to help escape an abusive situation, and then other services such as emergency utility services, emergency housing assistance, cell phones, food, clothing, other necessary items.
Here in this photograph are pictures of some of our affiliate member agencies. And these are just agencies that have larger programs that serve different communities, different needs, but within their larger programs, they have domestic violence programs as well. And so we partner with them to help meet the needs of other people throughout the community that we may not be touching through our member agencies. And they also help to provide culturally specific services. So, for example, Progresso Latino, they have a small domestic violence program, and we work with them and help train members of the community together. And it's important because members of Hispanic or Latino community, their needs in regards to recovering or the process of going through domestic violence looks different because some of their needs are more culturally specific. And so it's important to have agencies that provide those very culturally specific resources. This way we can help make sure we're helping all survivors to the best of our abilities. Same with Center for Southeast Asians, partner with them to help provide culturally specific resources and services for members of this community. And Crossroads, we work with them often through the shelter and housing programs. And all these agencies are incredibly important. As John was saying, we work statewide to provide services and help victims or survivors throughout the state. And these affiliate member agencies are important to allow us to continue that. Yes. So this is SOAR, our Sisters Overcoming Abusive Relationships advocacy group. This group is housed at the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and it is made up of victims or survivors of domestic violence, and they help advocate across the state for better education, better services, better understanding of what survivors face and need when they're going through the domestic violence, going through the relationships, all that trauma, and then educating others about what they need as well. They do trainings throughout the state, different communities, schools. Recently, they took a trip to Washington, D.C. to discuss the 18th annual DV Counts Day, which John will talk about a little bit later. And they were part of that big press conference. During the legislative session, we work very closely with SOAR to help develop our legislative agenda to help create policies that will better help survivors in these situations, and they help advocate throughout this process as well.
Great. So just a basic definition of domestic violence that we can work with for this presentation. A pattern of abuse within an intimate partner relationship that consists of power and control dynamics, in which one person tries to establish power and control over the other person with coercive behaviors over a period of time, often in an escalating pattern. And the abuse itself can be physical, sexual, verbal, psychological, or as is very often the case, financial abuse as well. And so these are some of the types of abuse, and again, some difficult content here, but these are some of the different types of abuse and how domestic violence can show up in an intimate partner violence situation.
So these are two examples of types of abuse that are not physical, so sometimes can go unrecognized or not as understood, but are still incredibly important because they still have a large impact on victims when they are in these situations. So a big one is psychological abuse, and acts of physical violence can also be seen as psychological abuse. But for all intents and purposes, psychological abuse in this instance is the non-physical acts that cause trauma to victims. And they can happen in private or in public situations. And the point of these types of abuse is to humiliate and make the victim feel like they don't have any power. If they don't feel like they have any power, they don't feel like they can leave. They don't have the means to leave. And this can happen through people like threatening family members, pets, children. Gaslighting or crazy making is another common type of psychological abuse that happens. And again, it's just to make the victim feel like they don't have power, can't leave. Financial abuse is another common one that happens. And in regards to housing, this is incredibly important because if someone doesn't have the financial means to get out and to try and find housing, then what do they do? So financial abuse is a huge barrier to victims or survivors actually getting to safety and getting into housing in these relationships. And so one of them that happens often and is huge is the ruining of credit scores. So the abusive party can take out a whole bunch of credit cards in the victim's name, doesn't pay anything, and then the victim's credit score is ruined. And then where do they go from there? They can't, it's hard to apply for housing, rental, when your credit score has been damaged, as it often is in these situations, and pretty severely, not allowing them to get any financial resources as well of their own. So not allowing them to get jobs, prevent them from getting jobs. The abusive party controls everything. Another form that happens often is abusive litigation could be considered financial abuse, and that's just when a abusive party takes the survivor to court over and over again, usually over frivolous, baseless claims, as another way to control and cause harm to the victim. And this doesn't allow them to get financial security or gainful employment because they can't hold down a job because they're constantly in court. And eventually the employer is like, I'm sorry, this isn't a fit. And then they just have to start from scratch all over again, or cost for court is very expensive as well. And if you don't have the financial means to pay for it, where do you go from there? So these are two very impactful types of abuse that often happens with victims and prevents them in so many ways to get safety. So in the year 2023, all of our member agencies, including Crossroads, served over 9,000 clients. And throughout the year, that means over 9,000 clients received services from us, 136 adults and 142 children stayed in domestic violence shelters. 24 adults and 34 children spent time in transitional housing. And 13 adults and 11 children stayed in permanent supportive housing throughout 2023.
So thanks, Meg. Yeah, and just to kind of continue on the statistics here as well, there's a point in time count that Meg is referring to that we participate every year, which is our national partners at the National Network to End Domestic Violence run this point in time count, which is just a 1 day, 24-hour period where they survey victims in all the states, and they survey the needs, the calls that come in, and especially the unmet needs, because local programs don't have the resources or capacity with the current housing crisis and cuts to victim services at the federal level as well, don't have the capacity to serve victims with the amount of needs that they have. So the top unmet need is consistently around housing and access to emergency shelter. So in the most recent point in time count in a 24-hour period in Rhode Island, 90% of the unmet requests from victims for services were related to emergency housing or affordable housing options. And then these are some of the prior, I know we need to get through some slides a little faster here, but there's just some other years as well that you can see kind of the trend over time. And as we've entered this pretty acute housing crisis right now, and during the pandemic years, the unmet needs have only grown more severe, unfortunately. And as an example of that, we have we can look at point in time counts, and we can also look at the average length of stay at a shelter for a victim. And it used to be that it was about around a month or 30 days. And then we saw that number climb significantly up to 37 nights for the average shelter client in 2015. And then it really went up significantly to 80 nights for an average client shelter stay in 2023, representing over 100% increase over the last 9 years, really showing that it's not that survivors want to stay in shelter longer. It's just that once they're in shelter, if they can find an available shelter bed, they just have no other place to go because the housing crisis is so severe at this time. So again, looking at some of the barriers for why it's so difficult for survivors to find housing, the lack of affordable housing options, lack of housing stock at this time in Rhode Island and regionally because of the housing crisis. They may not have safe housing that can meet their needs, such as a security system or changing locks as needed to feel safe and secure with the survivor and their children. As Meg mentioned, economic abuse is common in almost all domestic violence situations. So there may not be the financial resources to find a new place to live. And then isolation from support systems. Survivors will isolate their victims. And then, as we'll talk about more soon, we will get into housing discrimination from landlords, lenders who don't want to serve victims and feel hesitant to serve a domestic violence victim if it's going to be a nuisance for them or perceived as kind of an annoying factor for them to work with a victim of crime at their building. And then relocating is not always an option. They may have children, they don't have the financial means, there may be language barriers or cultural barriers to moving. So that is not always an option for every survivor.
Housing is safety and everyone deserves to be safe. Currently, domestic violence and sexual violence is the leading cause of homelessness among women and children. So this means where domestic violence is happening, it's causing women and children disproportionately to become homeless. And this is a common struggle we have with survivors, as we stated throughout. Many of them seek housing and safety, and it's an unfortunate request we often cannot make. And the need for safety is incredibly important to them because they're trying to flee these situations where safety was not a part of their lives, and now they're trying to seek it, and not having the availability to do that is very impactful on survivors. It also isn't uncommon for people to experience violence when they are unhoused. So we get feedback like, I left and then I was on the street and I left to escape the violence. Unfortunately, I'm on the street and I'm still experiencing forms of violence. So getting people into housing is safety for all in the community. And as all these barriers that John discussed are incredibly important to recognize because they prevent that safety from happening. Also, landlords and understanding what safety looks like in housing for victims or survivors is incredibly important. And understanding that sometimes the way survivors are acting is a trauma response, and they're not trying to be difficult or uncooperative. They're still healing, and the trauma is still very fresh in a lot of their brains and their minds. And what they could appear or see as aggression really is the survivor just trying to fight for safety for themselves. And so just working with landlords to understand that is incredibly important. And so what do survivors need? As we discussed, one of the barriers is there isn't affordability out there in regards to housing. So they absolutely need that. And more long-term options, because as John was saying, we can get survivors or victims into shelters, but then they have nowhere to go after that. And they can only stay in shelters for so long because the longer we have someone in the shelter, it prevents us from getting someone new in. And then what do we do in those situations? Affordable childcare. Childcare is incredibly expensive. And as we were stating, financial abuse happens often. And if they can't afford childcare, how can they afford to work? How can they afford rent, et cetera, et cetera? Public transportation, cars are incredibly expensive, as we all know, maintaining them, gas, and just having a means to get to where they need to go is incredibly important as well. Living wage. I know back when a few years ago, the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence was part of the team for the Fight for 15, which eventually did pass. Unfortunately, we're recognizing that while $15 at that point in time was great, we need more. And what survivors also need, as I was stating previously, is landlords to understand what trauma responses could look like and recognizing them as they're just coming from a place of healing and not intentionally trying to cause harm, or landlords understanding how important confidentiality is for survivors. Because once they get out, they don't want to be found by this person who caused them harm. So confidentiality is incredibly important to them. They don't want that information to get out there so the person could potentially find them. So right now, in Rhode Island, there's the address confidentiality program, which we were a huge part of getting that passed and implemented, where survivors who relocate have a PO box, and having landlords understand that even though they have the PO box, whatever survivors need or whatever the landlord needs to get information and get in contact with survivors, et cetera, they can still do through the address confidentiality program. They don't need the actual address. PO box is fine. And reasonable accommodations as well for survivors. Simply having a Ring doorbell installed where they live is incredibly important. This way they can see who's coming and going, and they can feel like they have more control over what's going on and can better prepare themselves and be more safe. So all these things are incredibly important for survivors and absolutely need. Now here's just a list of some of the RI housing resources. As John was saying, we have the member agencies, the advocates that worked directly with survivors, and depending on the needs of survivors, you give the referrals to all these different agencies, or if other people are looking for help that aren't advocates themselves but are working with survivors and trying to help them with housing, these are great referrals that they can reach out to get that help.
Absolutely, including South Coast Fair Housing, who we've already heard from. So a really important resource for survivors as well. So, and just to wrap it up, we're going to wrap up here the last couple slides. But as was already mentioned, the Rhode Island Fair Housing Practices Act from way back in 1968, but then it added domestic violence as a protected class in 2002. And it prohibits discrimination in housing against someone if they are a domestic violence victim or they have a restraining order for domestic violence. So there can be it's unlawful for a landlord or a housing lender to discriminate on a DV survivor because of their status or because they're seeking or have received a restraining order in court. So that is a form of housing discrimination that's prohibited, and they cannot, so lenders cannot ask or inquire about status as a domestic violence victim, and they cannot otherwise discriminate against a DV victim for this reason. And just mentioning the more recent source of income protection, which prohibits landlords or lenders from inquiring about or discriminating against someone for having a source of income such as public benefits, alimony, child support, Social Security or SSI benefits, cash assistance, veterans benefits, or Section 8 housing voucher. That's a really big one. And often survivors are reliant on these form of public benefits to safely heal and get out of an abusive situation. So it's really important that they're not discriminated against as well for having public forms of benefits or social safety net protections. So that's an important recent addition from 2021 to the Rhode Island Fair Housing Practices Act. And I think that's it, right? There's our contact info. If there's any questions, we're happy to take them as well.
Yes. And on the bottom right-hand side, those are all our socials, so you can follow us there. I did see some questions, but I don't know if we're saving them till after.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. We will get to questions at the end of the presentation if time allows, but we do have some in there, and that's actually a great plug for those of us in attendance. If you would like to put your questions into the chat, we'll try to get through as many as we can once everybody has had a chance to speak. Thank you, John and Megan, for your insights onto the challenges faced by survivors and the support available through referrals and other resources. It was incredibly informative. Now we're going to turn our attention to the important topic of serving individuals with disabilities in housing. I'm pleased to introduce Beth Pinkham, Associate Director of the Ocean State Center for Independent Living. Beth will share valuable insights into how OSIL can assist real estate professionals working with buyers with disabilities. She will provide quick tips for interacting with individuals with disabilities and discuss why homeownership isn't typically seen as feasible for them. So please join me in welcoming Beth Pinkham.
Morning, everybody. Happy to be here and appreciate your taking the time to be here. As was mentioned, I'm here from the Ocean State Center for Independent Living. So I would just want to start by giving you a little bit of information about us and introducing our agency to you. We are a consumer-controlled, community-based nonprofit organization. And we are here to basically remove the attitudinal and physical barriers that exist in community that prevent individuals from disability from being full participants in their community. Brief history of OSL. There are some 400 centers for independent living throughout the country. We were founded in 1988. And again, we really are a go-to resource center for disability services, resources in our state. And we work within the state of Rhode Island. We cover the entire state. We even go out to New Durham if needed, or Block Island, as most know. One of the things that make Centers for Independent Living different or more unique from other nonprofit agencies that might work within our community is that independent living centers grew out of the disability civil rights movements of the early 70s by some college students that came on campus out in California, really saw a lack of resources, accessibility, so forth, for them to be able to participate in college life. So they started a hub resource center for other, where they would get together and share information, work on accessibility issues, and then from there it blossomed into the nationwide independent living movement that it is today. In essence, there are 5 core services that we are providing as a Center for Independent Living. One is advocacy, and that's on a systems level. We are impacting legislation that impacts the disability community on a statewide level, on down to an individual level, where there is an individual who might be trying to access various resources, services, and is having difficulty doing that. We also provide independent living skills training, and that runs the gamut based on the independent living goals that the person has. And that can range from, how can I make my home more accessible, to I can no longer drive, so now I need to find out what my transportation options are, and so on. Basically, any of the goals or any services we are providing and working with the individual on are going to be consumer directed. So it's that they are the participant, and they are kind of identifying for us what their needs are, where they want to go, and then our role is to partner with them to between the services and things that we can offer and other resources and so forth that exist out there that they can access and go forward and use. We also, our big one is information and referral. Anyone can be in contact with our center and be able to get information that they need. I'm sorry, I'm just plugging this in because, of course, battery's going to start to die. And get information that they may need. Because another aspect that makes Centers for Independent Living unique is that 51% of our board of directors and 51% of our staff, for example, I am hard of hearing and wear hearing aids, are individuals with disability. So that really means as the individual with a disability is interacting in any way with our center, it is more than likely that they are going to run into other peers that are facing a lot of many of the similar kinds of lived life experiences and challenges and so forth that they're running into. And we also work on with youth who are transitioning from school to adult services, and adults that are trying to transition home from a nursing home. Some of the ways that we can work with you and offer directly from us that will help is we have programs that will assist individuals with getting assistive technology in their home. And that can range anything from, you know, somebody may be in touch with us and just have some questions and looking for resources and wondering what might work for them, on up until working with individuals who need some financial assistance. We have some grant programs and things that will help them you know, get some of the, you know, services and some of the implements that they need at home. And it can range from anything from, you know, things that will help someone in the kitchen continue to, you know, do food prep and things. Might be something like a one-handed cutting board, on up to things like grab bars in the bathroom area, reaches to be able to get things, a rollator to assist with mobility. It can run the gamut based on, you know, the individual's needs. One of the highlights I do want to talk about this morning is we do offer disability awareness, sensitivity, and training. And so we are more than willing to, you know, we go out and provide this training to organizations and other professionals and so forth, to be able to work within the community and just heighten some awareness. We could spend a lot of time on this, but for the sake of time, when it comes to working with someone with a disability, some of the kind of quick tips I just wanted to mention are things like, you know, be yourself, interact with that person the same way that you really would pretty much anybody else. And it's okay to ask questions if you're not sure how to assist somebody or so on. The best person to ask is the individual. They'll let you know what you need, and they appreciate being asked. And you know, it's okay to do that. And so don't hesitate to do that. And if there are folks out there who are interested in having us, you know, come out and do some disability awareness, and you know, we're more than happy to talk about that and set up some times to do that. Some of our programs and other things that we can do with folks that might be helpful to them, you know, for, in terms of hearing, we do have a partnership with the University of Rhode Island called the Gift of Hearing Program, where individuals can be fitted for hearing aids that they may need at a reduced cost. So that's very helpful for people. One of our bigger programs at our center is our home access program. And again, this is a program where we will help improve access to the home on a lot of times a physical level, whether it's, you know, widening doorways or putting a ramp on a house, or you know, whatever it might be that will help the individual you be able to use the areas of their home that they want to use more independently. And again, we are able to you know, give people recommendations and share ideas and put them on the right path. And we also have some grant funding and so forth that will help actually fund some of these home modification projects. Just for an awareness, the grant funding is last resort funding. So when we are working with someone on those kind of issues, we will go through information with them, such as any, you know, disability, or, you know, there are some veterans programs, things like that people may be able to access to get some assistance. We will clarify what any insurance that they may be involved with, you know, is able to cover and pay for or not. And then, you know, we can, you know, go from there. Some of the ideas of home modifications we've done with people, you'll see things like modified stairs, stair glides, tub cuts in the bathroom to make getting in and out easier, you know, that type of thing. We're able to also assist with providing some smart home technology for individuals so that they can be able to, you know, function independently in their home, lock and unlock doors, be alerted if, you know, someone's at the door, or, you know, manage temperatures or lighting, all of those kinds of things. The program does not allow us to actually provide, like, you know, laptop or tablet or, you know, the kind of phone, device to, you know, use some of the smart home technology from, but there are other ways that we can do some of that, you know, that they may be able to get the device to do that, but we can put some of the smart home technology in place. Let's see. Some of the things that also is not, we're not a state agency. We do not provide case management. We don't act as rep payees for individuals when it comes to any type of Social Security benefits. We're not a residential facility, and we are not a medical facility, and we're not like a crisis intervention or emergency center. And some of the things I just wanted to add after that in terms of, again, it's a topic that could go on longer than we have today, but some of the things that prevent individuals with disabilities from, you know, looking at home ownership are just an overall assumption that if someone has a disability, home ownership is not an option for them. And then there are situations where that's, you know, simply not the case. There are things that other things that get in the way that we kind of refer to, excuse me, as systemic poverty. So for example, if an individual has a disability and is, you know, trying to even save up, you know, out there working as you or I would, and trying to save up the money to have a down payment or so forth. If they're on certain Social Security programs and so forth, their assets are controlled and they're not able to even have, you know, money in the bank to be able to do those kinds of things. So there are, you know, there are those kinds of things that, you know, simply, you know, just get in the way. And there's a lack of, you know, knowledge and understanding, again, throughout the disability community and beyond, you know, into the real estate area that someone could even be thinking about this, you know, that kind of thing. So again, we are located in Warwick. That's where our main office is. But we also have a satellite office in Pawtucket. So I really want to encourage people that as you're maybe working with someone with a disability out there, please be in touch with our office. And we are more than happy to steer people in the right direction. So
Fantastic.
thank you for your
Thank you
time.
so much. Thank you so much, Beth. I appreciate your illuminating presentation on OSL's critical work in supporting individuals with disabilities. Your tips for interacting with these clients and your insights into overcoming barriers to homeownership were extremely valuable. I would like to share with our attendees, this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the RIAR website. So don't worry if you haven't gotten the contact information from everyone's slides, you will be able to access that after the fact. Our final speaker today is going to help us apply all the important information we've discussed thus far today into real estate practices and for brokerages. I'm pleased to introduce Pauline Bennett, Regional President of Coldwell Banker Realty in the Northeast. Pauline's extensive experience and dedication to diversity and inclusion make her the ideal expert to provide actionable guidance on fostering an inclusive and equitable real estate environment. So please join me in welcoming Pauline Bennett.
Thanks, John. And thank you to all the great panelists that went before. I've learned even more today, just listening to the great information shared before. And it's a super reinforcer of just how important awareness is for the really, really strong need for all of us to keep equity, inclusion, non-discrimination at the forefront of our minds. You know, I couldn't help but thinking that, you know, kudos to RIAR for putting this on, but John, to a certain degree, I think that your job and my job really is to drive the awareness of our collective agents that are out in the world, right, delivering these real estate services on a daily basis. You know, Coldwell Banker has a very rich history of fair housing, you know, of being a champion and, you know, and a guiding light for fair housing. It's been, you know, some of our core values for many, many years. You know, in addition to the regular kind of state licensing requirements that are incumbent upon a real estate professional in it to, you know, the fair housing education that's incumbent upon them to take. In addition to that, you know, Coldwell Banker had created a pledge for fair housing that was opened up to the entire industry. As a company, we have a DE&I, a dedicated DE&I team to make sure that we are bringing diversity, equity, inclusion into every aspect of our business. And as a company, we were one of the first signers of the Equality Act, looking to make sure that some of the newer classes that need protection from discrimination and need protection and advocacy for fair housing become permanent protected classes. So we have a really rich history of this belief, but it's not lost on me that even with all of that focus, that discrimination can still happen in some of the most subtle aspects. So even though I think many people and real estate professionals at their core believe in the right and the importance of fair housing for all, it's remarkable how you know, my fellow panelist Christina started out by talking about how long fair housing has been. Over 50 years it's been you know, at the forefront of our mind, and yet here we are still talking about how it can exist in the world and just the absolute impact that it has on an individual's life, their sense of safety, you know, their ability to care for their families, etc. So we have come a long way in what I would call like the overt discrimination. You know, some of the things that used to happen in the past that, you know, that resulted in the legislation that's gotten us where we are today. I think where we're at right now is really in the more subtle, you know, microaggressions that people aren't, that unconscious bias that people and real estate professionals need to be really educated on, so that their minds, so that their awareness and their openness and their understanding of exactly what could be that unconscious bias that could lead to an unintended discrimination of service or support to somebody looking for housing, what that can actually look like. Christina, back in the very beginning, also talked about testers. And I know, you know, look, in my job, you know, I have 300 agents that I'm responsible for in the state of Rhode Island, but I have 6,200 agents that I'm responsible for across the New England states. And that, you know, we absolutely reinforce to our real estate professionals that testers are critical and a critical component to making sure that we all of us, but my industry especially, are really putting into practice and really practicing our trade the way that we need to make sure that we aren't consciously or subconsciously violating fair housing laws on some level. So I think testing is a hugely valuable component to making sure that that we are delivering our service in the best way possible. I can't help but think, when you look at the headlines today, and there's you can't pick up a newspaper or listen to headline news right now without hearing the crisis of housing that housing is in our country right now. And that's for people that aren't in protected classes. I mean, the absolute sense of urgency that all of us should have when we're at that kind of a crisis level for people that that are in a protected class, or maybe are coming out of an abusive situation, or having a physical or any kind of disability, that it really is incumbent upon all of us to pour additional resources into making sure that we're serving that portion of the community. Because being in this industry for as long as I have been, I know the importance of housing, and we are, housing is at a crisis level in the country right now. So I just want to give a shout out again to RIAR for putting this panel together. A shout out to the fellow panelists for the great work that you're doing for protected classes, and just give just reassure all of you that from one of the largest real estate companies in the country, it is not lost on us that we have to continue to keep this front of mind for all of our real estate professionals, and that it's also what I would kind of call that next level awareness. It's no longer just, discrimination based on race is top of mind for everybody when they think about fair housing. And that certainly is a major protected class, and something that we all need to be aware of. And, and hopefully we've done really great work to move beyond that. But as we continue to peel this onion back on really making sure that all of the protected classes under the fair housing laws in each of our, in all of our states, but specifically, to Rhode Island and your neighboring states, that as we peel this onion back, that all of those protected classes, that we're serving them well, and that we're really diligent on that microaggression and the subtleties that we can find in discrimination for fair housing. So, John, I think that's kind of the message that I would give to everybody as kind of the leader of a group of real estate professionals out there wanting to serve the community, and that probably gives you a good bit of time to answer Q&A.
Thank you so much, Pauline. That definitely was great, and I appreciate you sharing these actionable strategies for us to foster a more inclusive real estate practice. We do have some time for questions now, so I do see that there are a few in the chat. The first one that has come up is for either John or Megan, or perhaps both of you. One attendee was wondering if you could share some data around domestic violence in regards to men being victims. They've tried to help a young man that needed to move out, but was not successful in helping them find temporary housing. They've had much better luck in the past with helping women find housing in shelters and temporary housing. So if you guys could speak to that, that would be great.
Yes, I'm happy to speak to that, and thank you for the question. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. Of course, domestic violence impacts all folks, all individuals. So it's something that unfortunately does not discriminate by, race or ethnicity or class or, zip code or anything like that. So while we know that statistically looking at, service statistics, systems statistics around, court, law enforcement intervention, injuries, emergency room interventions. We do know that intimate partner violence has a disproportionate impact on women and LGBTQ plus folks as well. So we do know that. And when we're talking about it statistically overall, we are usually talking about men's violence against women. That is the most common, and certainly in terms of the impact and the, you know, the severe impacts where medical treatment, restraining orders, other, you know, counseling, emergency shelter, those sort of protections are needed. That's by and large what we're talking about. However, of course, it impacts men. Of course, it impacts male identifying folks as well. Of course, it impacts everyone, right? So we want to have services that are accessible and open to all individuals, all survivors of intimate partner violence, no matter how they identify. So of course, this includes men as victims and survivors as well. So all of the programs, all of the domestic violence shelters and programs will support and find resources, supports for men and male identifying folks as well. I think in particular, and just looking at the question in particular, it sounds like it's a family violence situation, which is a little bit different than intimate partner violence when we have, you know, interpersonal violence between romantic or dating partners. This sounds like a family member situation where it's a father and adult child, which of course can happen as well. The dynamics are a little bit different in that case where it's family violence involving, you know, a parent and a child instead of, you know, two intimate partners. So the dynamics will look a bit different, but certainly they're going to need some of the same services and supports, whether it's restraining orders in family court, which we have advocates that can assist those folks in all four of the main courthouses in Rhode Island for family court restraining orders to get a civil restraining order and get free confidential advocacy from court advocates that staff all of those courthouses to help victims get restraining orders in family court or district court, depending on, you know, where they're filing the case. In this case, it sounds like it'd be a family court petition for a restraining order. And we could refer to Rhode Island Legal Services if they need legal support and an attorney for that matter as well. One program, you know, in terms of men's services in particular, there is one program that has a dedicated, in the greater Providence area, one program comes to mind, which is Sojourner House, which has a dedicated men's program. So Sojourner House in the Providence area has a dedicated men's program, but certainly all of the programs will work with any victim that presents to them and is seeking resources and services. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question. Really important one.
Great. Thank you very much, John. I appreciate that thorough answer on that. The next couple questions, I'm actually going to combine a little bit. So one user pointing to Pauline or Christina was asking about what the most common issues that are flagged when it comes to testing. But then after that, I would also like to open it up to the group. Another attendee is wondering how you as panelists feel whether or not we have effective enforcement for the protected classes. And so if we could talk first about the testing and then whether we feel as though there's effective enforcement, that would be great.
I did a quick chat answer in the chat. From my experience and from my perspective, the feedback that I get on what I would call the two top issues are financial assistance. So discrimination based on a housing voucher, alimony, but primarily a housing voucher is the number one testing issue that we encounter. And then race and national origin. So even though before I said, you know, that's kind of the more obvious one that we think we're better at, it still does surface. And those would be the top two issues that are related back. And I'll add the third in, the third one would be familial status. That you can probably think about in the course of our business would be a common, you know, so with children, without children, but that idea of familial status. So in my experience, those would be the top three that I would say that we come across with testing. Christina?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question for me to answer in any real way because I think there's, in my experience, right, testing usually only reveals the kind of discrimination that we're actually investigating at the time, right? So when we conduct testing, we're usually looking for one or maybe two possible types of discrimination, and what drives what we're testing at the moment is usually a complaint that's come in or something, you know, an interest that we've heard in, or like a set of complaints that we've received or concerns that we have about a particular issue. So in some ways, right, like testing isn't really great for figuring out like what's the most common form of discrimination, because our decisions about what to test for and where to test can impact what we're finding. So I feel like every kind, you know, almost every single protected class, the discrimination happens in a slightly different way. And so our testing will often change depending on what protected class we're looking at. And I think Pauline touched upon this a few times, right? Where I think people who, or when race discrimination or national origin discrimination happen, it tends to be less overt because, you know, people have learned not to be overt about those types of discrimination anymore, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen anymore. And so I would say, I can tell you, we have not received any complaints about military or veteran status discrimination. And so that's one that I think doesn't happen frequently, or at least we haven't heard about it happening. But other than that, I feel like there, you know, even sometimes we're testing for a certain protected class, and then I'm thinking of a particular real estate agent actually, where we were testing for one protected class, and the real estate agent, through their comments, indicated discrimination against two other protected classes, right? So sometimes we find other protected classes are also implicated when someone is, you know, not conforming to the laws on another protected class. And I'll quickly answer the question about enforcement, right? And then other folks can chime in. I think for me to feel satisfied that our organization was doing everything that we could, we would need to add like 2 zeros onto the end of our budget. So I don't think fair housing enforcement is really touching on, I think we as an organization are barely scratching the surface of the kinds of discrimination that are happening across various marketplaces and geographies and protected classes across our service area. And I'm sure that if you were to ask everyone else here whose work touches on fair housing and other agencies who, you know, like the Rhode Island Commission for Human Rights, I'm sure, and HUD, I'm sure they would say the same thing, that we're barely scratching the surface.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you highlighting the need for improved oversight into this important topic. Our next question is going to be directed towards Beth. An attendee is asking, where do OSL sensitivity training and awareness programs take place? And will you travel to brokerages or local association of realtors to conduct them?
Absolutely. I mean, that's mainly where, you know, where they'll take place. We will work with, you know, whatever organization or so forth, you know, is, you know, looking to have it, you know, looking to meet and, you know, provide that. So, yep, we're ready to do it on the road wherever it's needed.
Fantastic. So everyone hear that? Let's put them to use and get that training done for everybody. Another attendee is asking, are there avenues for informing landlords and tenants about fair housing laws? So I think the question is, how can we improve knowledge of the consumer in this arena? And I will open that up to any attendee that would like to answer.
John, I'll jump in and say that, you know, if a landlord or a tenant is represented by a real estate professional, that's going to be our first opportunity to bring that awareness, education, and legal compliance in the large majority of cases. We do know that obviously there are a few exemptions. The 3-family was kind of noted earlier, but if they're represented by a real estate professional, that would be the first opportunity to bring awareness to a landlord or a tenant.
Great, thank you. A quick follow-up, Ann Enos, the Director of Professional Development, has indicated that They will be working with Beth to create a CE course for these types of specifics. And we also want to remind all attendees that there will be a recording of this. And so RIAR will send that along with resources that you guys can use. The final question, it looks like in our chat here, is who should you contact when you know your employer is breaking fair housing laws? That's an interesting question.
Can I answer that?
Please do, Christina.
Okay. I think there are a number of options. If we're talking about an office or employer that is a member of the Rhode Island Realtors, right? I am sure there is a mechanism to report to Rhode Island Realtors, to the licensing board, the state licensing board. You can also report that information to my office, to the Rhode Island Commission for Human Rights, and to HUD. Those are the places, I think the 5 places that I would point you to. I think if you report something to us, I think our practice typically is to talk about options with you. And, you know, obviously one of the things that I'll say to folks is sometimes folks are afraid of reporting to a government entity because you don't really know what's going to happen with that information when you share it with a government entity. And so one of the roles that I think our organization tries to fill is to provide a non-governmental agency option. So what, you know, nothing that you tell us is public record. We don't have any obligation to do anything other than to, you know, make sure that you understand your options as best as we can present them to you, and then we kind of try to take direction from you as much as possible. So you know, there isn't like you're not when you contact us, you're not initiating a formal complaint process like you would if you like you might be if you contact a government agency. So so there are different options, and you kind of have to figure out what you're ready for. And sometimes like we welcome like tips, what we call tips, right? Like I don't need somebody to be a witness moving forward in a case. One of the things that we can do is investigate something on our own and file a complaint on our own. And so sometimes just a little bit of information can help us figure out, okay, let's look at this issue now. And so anyway, those are some options.
Great. Thank you, Christina. So I think that is all the questions that have come through in the chat, and we are nearing the end of our 90-minute panel presentation. I would like to thank everyone for your thoughtful questions and for engaging in today's Real Talk Forum on subtle diversity. Your participation and interest in these important topics shows your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our industry. I would love to thank every single one of the panelists here for donating their time to share their insights with you. It really is incredibly valuable to hear what you all offer and bring to the table, and it's been very enlightening and impactful. I am going to put a quick plug in, and Enos also let me know that we do have CEs already available for a lot of the subject matter that has been covered. So please do make use of the continuing education that is being offered through RIAR, especially as it pertains to these topics. It's really important. And as the chair of the DEI committee at RIAR this year, and because it is Fair Housing Month, all of our Realtor members have access to the Fair Haven simulation, which is a interactive program that we can all take to help test our knowledge about fair housing practices. You can access that through fairhaven.realtor. And it will take 60 to 90 minutes depending on how it goes, but it's a really eye-opening tool that I think everybody could benefit from. So please accept this as my challenge to all of you to participate in that. As we conclude, I encourage you all to apply these strategies and best practices that were shared today in your real estate work. Together, we can create a more inclusive and equitable industry and community. Thank you again for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you so, so much to the incredible staff at RIAR that made this program possible. We couldn't have done it without you. Take care.
Bye, everybody.